do that, we actually had to go back and define what we meant by genetically triggered, because this is not a term that necessarily all people agree on a definition for. And so in doing this, we recognize that some aneurysms are likely triggered by environmental risk factors. Blunt force trauma is known. So if you have a blunt force trauma to the chest, sometimes an aneurysm can develop because of that. Smoking is recognized as a risk factor, as is obesity, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and advanced age, something that hopefully none of us will actually escape, because escaping it is not the right answer. These are environmental risk factors that are fairly well recognized for aortas. It doesn't mean that people whose bodies respond to these risk factors and develop an aneurysm don't have a genetic trigger underneath, but we recognize these as being fairly potent environmental risk factors. Some aneurysms we know are caused by genetic disease, things like Marfan syndrome, Turner syndrome, which is a chromosomal abnormality, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and Louise-Dietz syndrome, a fairly recently recognized genetic abnormality. And so we know that some aneurysms are just very strongly associated with these particular disorders. However, there's another category where we're not as clear on the genetics and we don't understand nearly as well. These are the areas of familial thoracic aortic aneurysms and disease, early onset aneurysms in the absence of any of the known environmental risks, and bicuspid aortic valve. And that's something that all of you are intimately familiar with. And it's likely that these conditions have genetic triggers, but we don't know nearly as much about these disorders as we do some of those like Marfan syndrome. And so this was a category that was specific of interest to us, because this is where we think the big deficit occurs in research and where we need to put much of our energy. And so we came up with a list of eligibility criteria. This is a common means of doing research, is that you want to understand who you're studying and why you're studying them. And this is a fairly long list, and it includes the genetic disorders that I named before. Bicuspid aortic valve, and you'll see it actually divided into 3 different categories, because we really want to capture the diversity within bicuspid aortic valve disease. And so we obviously want to look at people who have bicuspid aortic valves and we know have aortic enlargement. But we also want to capture families that may not yet show aortic enlargement, but have a family history of bicuspid aortic valve. We didn't want to miss them out accidentally. And then there's a special category that we were particularly interested in looking at, and that's bicuspid aortic valve with coarctation of the aorta. And so that's something that some of our cardiologists were very clear that they wanted to see as a specific inclusion here. We also wanted to look at individuals with familial thoracic aortic aneurysm, misspelling there, but Fritz-Goldberg syndrome, and individuals who have an aneurysm and are at 50 years of age or younger, because that really removes that advanced age component there, and we think that those individuals are specifically at risk for other reasons. And then a couple of other places where people have congenital heart defects and have an aortic enlargement along with that. And that's another category that might include genetic or congenital heart defects, something like tetralogy of Fallot. And then we don't want to miss the familial component, and so we've put in a specific category for any first-degree relative that has a family member that's already enrolled in GenTAC. And so that means really a blood relative, a sibling, or an offspring in particular, or even parents of somebody who's already been enrolled under one of these other criteria. And so just to highlight that bicuspid aortic valve is going to be a big part of GenTAC for us. But GenTAC is more than just a registry. It's actually designed to be an ongoing research study. And so we've embedded research projects into GenTAC so that we can ensure that there's going to be rapid progress in achieving our goal of advancing our knowledge about thoracic aortic aneurysms and other cardiovascular complications. And this is highly appropriate since the GenTAC team was picked specifically for their expertise in this area. The GenTAC registry, however, will also be open to outside investigators who propose research projects that further the mission of GenTAC. And in all categories, scientific excellence is our standard. So these are just some examples of GenTAC research projects that have either been proposed and a couple that are slated to be started very soon. And one of our areas, since we defined GenTAC as being a registry of individuals with genetically triggered thoracic aortic aneurysms, is to undertake a study to identify genes that contribute to the risk of thoracic aortic aneurysms regardless of the rest of your genetic background. In terms of bicuspid aortic valves research project specifically, we think we have sort of an idea of what the frequency of bicuspid aortic valve is in the population, but we don't really have a good, strong, solid scientific answer to that, and so we want to look at that. We think that bicuspid aortic valve is genetically triggered. We think that the aneurysm might be triggered by genetics also, but we don't have a good handle on that and what that means, and that's something that we think really deserves a great deal of attention in terms of research. And all of this coming back, everything that we'll do in GenTAC will come back to clinical care and management and cures. We don't want this to be some esoteric study of, oh yes, now we know what's going on. We want to know how that information informs medicine and the care of patients.